This is Gemara Zevachim Daf Tzadi Hey, and this is the Daf for the fourth day of Chanukah. We like all learning to be an incredible schos or schos aliyas neshama for Penina Basra of Dave Bear, sponsored by her children, longtime supporters of the Daf, B'siyata de Shemaya, Penina Basra of Dave Bear, whose yahrzeit is tomorrow on the fifth day of Chanukah. Her neshama should be elevated to a higher place in Gan Eden Shalmaila, closer to the Kisei HaKavod, be a Militz Yesher for the entire Mishpacha, as well as we like all the learning to be an incredible schos refuah shleima for Gabriel Simcha b'Miriam Ahuva b'Seich Sha'ar Chayli Yisrael, and we start a new mission on the bottom of Tzadi Dalid Amid Beis, a beged sheyatza chutz la'klayim, a beged. And this is the beged that we've been discussing, a beged with a stain from the dam achatos that was brought out, chutz la'klayim, outside the azara, and nichnas umechavsei b'makom kadosh. Similar to what we learned prior, that the kibos has to be done b'makom kadosh. So even if it's brought outside, it has to be brought back inside, and the kibbutz be done inside in the makom kadosh. Nit machutz leklayim. But let's say while being outside, this garment became tamei, then karai, you have to rip it, because now that it's a destroyed garment, it's no longer tamei. Nichnas, bring it back in umachavsei b'makom kadosh. Case A of the Mishnah, the case of begadim that were brought to lachutz and the different scenarios. Case B of the Mishnah, kli charesh yatzachos la'klayim, a kli chares, in which the chatos was cooked and went outside the chos la'klayim. Nichnas has to be brought back in v'shayvrai and then broken. Again, because there's no way to mitar it to makom kadosh. Nitma chos la'klayim. What do you got to do? So you can't bring it in when it's tamei. Noikva, you have to make a hole in it. V'nichnas v'shavra and makom kadosh. Kli nechaysh yatzachos la'klayim. Nichnas umarkai v'shayitva b'makom kadosh, and that is the hachshara process for a kli nechayshes, has to come back in, purge and rinse it. Nitbachos leklayim poichas, so you have to diminish it a little bit. Nichnas umarkai v'shayitva b'makom kadosh. So three cases really mimicking the previous cases that we learned. Which is the beged with the stain of the dam chatos, number one, which is kli chares and kli nechayshes. What happens if they're taking chutz leklayim and how they are required to be brought back in and then done what has to be done with them if they became tamei, etc. Says the Gemara, or I should say, frak the Gemara. Maskiv la ravino karai beged. Karai, if the garment was ripped, beged amar achmana, v'lav begedu. Says the Gemara, what do we say that if the beged went outside and became tamei, you have to rip it? But the Torah says beged, and once it's written, it's not considered a beged, and therefore, what usage is it to bring it back in, to be machabes it, to launder it? Is no longer a beged? And the Torah says you have to be machabes, you have to launder the beged. Says the Gemara, you leave over the mount for a kerchief, so there still is epis, a shame beged. Ask the Gemara, 1 second, Aini, is this true? It's considered connected, and therefore what was the whole reason you were ripping it? To make it not tamei, to make it a shever kli, frak the Gemara. But if you leave over leave over a amount that can be made into a handkerchief, then it's chibur, it's all considered one beged, and therefore what? And therefore it will not remove the tama. So then it doesn't help at all. Answers the Gemara, you're right, it retains the tama. However, that is only midrabanan, a concern that lost in the mikra, you might not come to rip the majority of it, but midaraisa, it is tahira, and therefore you could bring it back in to be Yetzizah in the kibbutz, the laundering, which will do something, because the beged has a substantial amount, it is to make a kerchief. Kli cheres sheyatza, you have a kli cheres that the chatas was cooked inside of it and went outside. Case A, bring it back in. Case B, if it came tummy, you got to make a hole in it, etc. Says the Gemara, Kli amar Achmana v'lo kliu. It's no longer a kli. So what are you helping us? Shenike v'sherish katan, says the Gemara, you make a hole the size of a small root. And again, therefore, that's the same balance that we're looking to maintain over here, that at one point it is considered enough broken that it does not have the tumah anymore, therefore allowing you to bring it back in. But the other point, still considered a kli, that there's a reason to bring it back in. And the third case of the Mishnah on the third line of Sadihei Amid Aleph, what do you have to do? If it became tamei, you have to diminish it a little bit. Ask the Gemara, sim kasha v'alav kliu, but it's not a kli. Answers the Gemara, derasif martzif, who you hammer the hole that you made back together. Now it back has a shame kli, and now you'll try to purge it once again. Omar Reish Lakish, going back in the first case, the case of the beged. Me'il shenitma. What about the me'il? What about the robe of the Kohen Gadol that got some dam chatas on it? What do you do now? You bring it into the azar, bring it into the azar, the chatzir, less than 3 by 3, and then you launder it. Misham shenamar lo yikra, the Torah said you cannot tear it. So says the Gemara, you have a little bit of a problem over here. You have the me'el, the robe of the Kohen Gadol with dam. It needs to be mechabes. So what do? What you do is you do it in small pieces. The reason is because you're not allowed to bring something that's tummy into the azara. But that's only if it's in a kli shalim. But if you bring small pieces of it in, then there would not be a problem, because each one would not have tumah on it. But at the same time, you wouldn't rip it, as you're not allowed to stop destroy the me'il. Ma'aser Ravada Barava, 1 second. Ha'avin v'herke ha'avin v'harake me'ima misham shalosh al shalosh. Frakter Ravada Barava, but wait, the whole din of shalosh by shalosh is not by a thicker cloth. It's not by all materials. So the me'il of the Kohen Gadol was a thick material. So why does it even help to bring it in small pieces? Answers the Gemara, Agavavehen Chashivi. The separate piece of cloth is not considered a beged, through being part of the larger garment. And therefore, it will still retain the status of the me'il. So therefore, even though normally if it's a thick material, it would not work. But this would, why? Because it still has a chashivos to the parent beged, up to the material, up to the me'il itself. Meaning, when do we say that a thick material is excluded from this halacha? Stam, I have swabs, I have little pieces of cloth. But over here, this little piece of cloth has a chashivos not onto itself. You're right. As a chashivos, to the parent, the me'il, and that's the reason why this will work. Asks the Gemara, Frak the Gemara, what is the way that we're laundering something? Shiva Samamanim, this is the way, the 7 detergents, as the Mishnah Nida discusses, this is how you launder a garment. We've learned in our Brais. It needs the Shiva Samimanim. It needs the 7 herbs, the 7 detergents. However, we have a problem, because one of the 7 Samimanim is Miraglayim, is urine. And you're not allowed to bring Miraglayim into the Beis HaMikdash. And therefore, how are you going to be Yitzei, the din of Kibos, on the beged that has the dam chatas on it? Says the Gemara, as we turn over to Sadihei Amid Beis. Perhaps you're going to suggest that you don't bring in the miraglayim onto its own, but you bring it in together, mixed with all the detergent, and you apply all shivas hamanim to the garment. But the problem is it can't be, because the Mishnah that listed the shivas hamanim, it told you a precise procedure how they have to be used. And says the Gemara, you know what that procedure is? If you put them on the garment not in order, you did nothing. But maybe, okay, so you don't mix them all 7 together. You mix them with 1. Case. But the Mishnah said that each and every one of the shivas hamanim, you have to scrub with it. So we're stuck, because you need the miraglayim by itself, but you're not allowed to bring the miraglayim into the Hazara. Answers the Gemara, the Mivla Leho Beroik Tafel. You know what you do? You take the miraglayim and you mix it together, Beroik Tafel, with it, which is tasteless saliva. That each one of the shivas hamanim, says Rish Lakish, has to be together with the roik tafel. So you have roik tafel together with each of the ingredients. So now we figured out a way that the miraglayim does not have to be brought in by itself to the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore you'll be able to get your shivas hamanim inside the Beis Hamikdash to clean the garments. Says the Gemara, whether you cooked inside a kliyak for a carbon, whether you poured the hot liquid inside of it, whatever is done requires to be mariko shtifa. You have to cleanse the kli, you have to machshir the kli once it's used to cook a carbon. Rav Shimon Aimer kachim kalim into the mariko shtifa, not by kachim kalim, says Rav Shimon, that only by the chatas, only by kachim that you could eat the shlamim, the asham, the chatas, but not to buy kachim kalim. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan Asher Tevushal Ba, you cooking it, Ba in the Elisha Bishal Ba, Ir Leteicha Roiteach Minayin. Where do we know if you poured into boiling as well? Tambalayim Har Asher Tevushal Ba Yishaver, Ba Rav Chama Dalei Ba'avir Tanur Ma'u. As Rabbi Bar Chama, what if the chatas was hung in the airspace of the oven? Does the oven afterwards need to be destroyed? It's if you cook in something, and when you cook in something, there's a baliyah, there's an absorbed taste that goes into the walls of the utensil, and that's where the Torah is makbid. Cooking without even absorbing. In both cases. So what do we see? Whether it's cooked in it or whether it's poured inside of it, both of them need to be kashered. So the Gemara wants to bring a raya right now that even though it's not actually mivushal, it's not actually cooked in the second utensil, we see it needs to be kasher. So seemingly the oven would be similarly. Responds the Gemara, no. I wasn't asking a case you could have a bliyah. You could get the taste into the wall of the kli without bishul, which is the case of ira roiteach when you pour it in. Kikami baylan, the fakarta case. Bishul b'lay bilua mai. That if it was cooked, but there's no absorbed taste. Hashem adam Rav Nachman Amar Rabba Ravua Tanu Shal Mikdash Al Mateches Ayah. Explains Rabba Ravua, Rav Nachman Amar Ravua, excuse me. The Tana of the Beis Hamikdash was made out of metal. Now if you're going to tell me that cooking without absorption, we're not makbid on nevit shel cheres. So what would be the whole reason that the oven was made out of cheres? So proves Rav Nachman Amar Rabba Ravua, for the fact that we had to make the oven out of metal, seemingly dictates that there is not going to be, that there is yes going to be a B'liya, that there yes is going to be something that's get absorbed in, and that's b'davka why you need to have the metal oven, and therefore if it wasn't, it would yes of course be required to be broken. Says the Gemara, no raya kimedika shiari minchas tafiyasa v'tanor v'ika bishul bilua avdina shal matecha. Says the Gemara, there's other reasons why it would have to be made out of metal, because the karban mincha was baked in the oven, and therefore the belia is yes going in, and that's the reason why it would have to be made out of metal. And again, let's remind ourselves that the way they used to cook bread is they would take the dough, slab it on the wall of the oven, and says Rashi, therefore the karban mincha, which of course had oil in it, so you have this oily dough sitting on the wall, it's going to be baked, cooked, I should even say, directly into the wall of the oven, and thereby the next day would be nicer, and that's why the oven would have to be broken. So therefore, there's no raya to our case when you have bishul v'loy bilua, in a case where it's hung and cooked in the airspace. Says the Gemara, 10 lines from the wide lines. First one line is matechas. There was a tanur that was greased with a coating of animal fat. Asara Rabba bar Ahilaya lemichal liriftali oilam. Rabbi Elaya said it's usher, the eating of its bread always. Afilu b'milcha, and even eating it with salt. Because you might come to eat it with kutach. You might come to eat it with dairy. This is a first cousin to something that we've seen, which is that you're not allowed to have milchig bread because you might come to eat it with meat. Here you have fakert. Here you have quote-unquote fleshig bread that we're saying is asr because you might come to eat it with milk. Frakti Gemara, Meisvei, 1 second. Ein losh and I see the b'chalav. V'im losh kolabaz kula asurim nehergal aveira. Kayoytze by similarly. Tashin is hanor ba'al yavim tash kolabaz kula asurat shi'esek is hatanor. Tiyofta d'rabar yivlai. Tiyofta. Says the Gemara, what do we see? We see that if you subsequently add sheyasik is hatanor, so then the brisa. If you fire up the oven, it does remove the blia from inside of it, and therefore the bread afterwards will not be a problem. So shows the Gemara says that Tiyufta d'Rabba Ravilai, who said that even afterwards you can never bake in this oven forever. He said, what was his lashing? Go up a few lines. L'rifta la'olam v'afilu b'milcha, but proves the Gemara that is incorrect. Amar le Ravina le Ravashi, says Ravina to Ravashi on the last narrow line. Once we fragged Rabbi Eloi, why did Rav say Kedera is bePesach yishberu, that the earthenware pots used for chametz have to be broken before Pesach? Why? Because the chametz goes into the wall of the kli. Why don't we say that we could see seemingly kasher it, just like we saw in the previous brisa by the ovens? When did the brisa say that when you have this oven with grease that you could clean it, kasher it, and use it again after it's used for milching your bread? It's only by an oven, a metal oven, but not by earthenware. It's only going to be if you fire it up from the inside. What do you mean? So before Pesach, just fire it up from the inside. Answers Gemara, very important rule. We're afraid it's going to break, and anytime we're afraid something's going to break, we do not allow you to kasher it. A tile ring, you fire it up from the outside, and then you make bread in it, is going to be aser because we're afraid you're not going to fire it up hot enough. Let's stop over here. Next time is a short one. We'll pick up from the halachas of kashering different utensils, v'chulu, and mirza Hashem.